Hey everybody, it's me, Bryson Booker, and it's time for one of the last BBTV reviews of 2017. Can you dig it? I guess I can. I'm gonna have to. It's one of the last reviews. So, I'm gonna be reviewing a movie, a 90s movie, just for you, and it's a movie that's just as good now as it was back then. What am I talking about? Well, that cheesy pun should let you know that I'm talking about New Line Cinema's 1995 release of the same name. Now and Then. Starring, here we go. Christina Ricci, Thora Birch, Gabby Hoffman, Ashley Ashton Moore, Melanie Griffith, Demi Moore, Rosie O'Donnell, and Rita Wilson. Definitely Rita Wilson. Definitely Rita. Stars all of those people. And it's basically a coming-to-age story about four girls in the 1970s and their experiences, what they've gone through, and basically how those experiences of them growing up in the 70s and what they did and what they encountered, how it shaped them to be the people who they are, well, at the time in 1995. I really don't know how Rosie O'Donnell turned up after this, but in this movie, this is supposedly how they turned out once they grew up. So it's a very simple story to understand, very simple, and it's just a great movie overall. I kind of stumbled on this movie in kind of a funny way. I never knew it was a movie because it's just one of those hidden gems of the 90s. You know, there's a lot of... They made a lot of movies in the 90s. Let's be honest. But the ones that you hear about the most were basically blockbusters of the decade. I mean, Pulp Fiction, Men in Black, Titanic, Forrest Gump, Home Alone. I mean, we all know those are 90s movies because they were 90s blockbusters. But then there's a whole bunch of other 90s films that were made during those years that you may have not have known about. And this was one of them. Now and Then was released in 1995. It's not a movie that one would call, oh my God, it's Now and Then. That's a 90s movie. It's not. It doesn't have that fame like that. It's kind of one of those hidden gems that you kind of stumble across, on, I don't know, Stars or HBO one of these days, and they just randomly play it, and then it's like, oh my God, I can't believe I looked over this movie. It's a great movie, and it really is. I stumbled upon it via one of my teachers in high school who gave me their CD collection from the 90s, of course. And included in the collection was the soundtrack of the same name, Now and Then. So I have the soundtrack here. So there's a CD of the soundtrack. And then I also have the original book for it. So let me see if I can get that out for you. So here we go. So there is the soundtrack for this movie, Now and Then. Prior to this time, I never knew it was a movie. I never really heard of it. And so I knew I had this soundtrack, and I was really curious to see, what the movie was about. So after kind of looking and searching and listening to the soundtrack and knowing that the soundtrack had a 70s, early 70s in particular vibe to it, I'm like, well, maybe this movie is something about the 1970s. And so just recently, I stumbled across this tape at the thrift store, and I'm like, heck, this is a movie I've been waiting to see for a while. So I picked it up, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a great movie. Again, it's basically just four women reminiscing on their childhood. That's the basic way I could explain it to you in like a minute. It's just, but the experiences that they face, the trials that they go through, really shaped them to be who they are as women that are now adults in the film, as the film portrays them to be. And a lot of these experiences that these girls face aren't good. A lot of them are obvious, childhood experiences, liking certain boys, listening to certain music, the obvious growing up experiences that a child has. These girls have those experiences, as well as experiences that test their faith, that test their trust in one another, and that test their commitment to be friends forever, which they basically stay for the rest of their lives. And so this movie basically lets you see that story firsthand. And by the end of it, you're saying, "Oh my goodness, they really did a nice job with this movie." Um, Again, the way that the story is told, the way that you can easily identify with each of the girls' personalities here. There's a better picture of them on the back here. So those are the four girls there. I can't remember all of their names at the moment, but you can easily identify with each one of them. I mean, you have a little bit of each girl inside of you, unless you're not a girl. I'm not a girl. But the point is, you can identify with the characters. You know the experiences that they're facing. You know the emotions that they feel, because at one time you felt those same emotions, whether being a boy or a girl. You know, you were frightened at one time. You thought you really didn't trust your friends like you did at one time. Your faith in yourself was tested at one time. And you can really identify with the characters of this movie from those emotions, from those different experiences, as you watch their experiences unfold. And then I just, my favorite part has to be the ending, where it all just comes together and the girls, are reminiscing and remembering everything that they've done and how it all just really shaped them to be great individuals. Despite their ups, despite the downs, despite those experiences that were really, really weird, they ended up having a purpose. And that's what some coming age stories fail to tell you. How does all of those experiences that you just saw on screen, how does that relate to now in this movie's case? Or in, another movie's case that's telling a story about the main character growing up. How does that relate to them now? This story does it, or this movie does it, in just a way that you can understand, like, okay, I can see why she's like that. I can see why this character is kind of a snob now, because 20 years ago she was doing this and that kind of made her a snob, and things like that. Some coming age stories kind of fail to show you how everything connects. Now and Then does a perfect job of connecting the experiences of these women and saying this is how it's still applicable to them today. And I love it to death. I love the soundtrack. The soundtrack has I said it before, an early 70s vibe to it. So you got songs from the Monkees, the band Free, Stevie Wonder, the Jackson 5, the Archies. I think one of the cheesiest songs on the album by the Archies, but it's on there, and so it really puts you in a great early 70s or late 60s vibe, which is basically what this movie is really going for, because that's really the main decade where it takes place. Again, it's just a really, really, really long, almost 2-hour flashback of these women's lives. But once you're done watching the movie, you can understand the experiences that these women face and how it shaped them to be the women they are today as adults, and how those experiences will influence them as they continue to grow. It makes a lot of sense. You may be confused in the middle of it, but just roll with it, guys. I was in the middle of this movie. I was just like, come on. Like, when is it going to get to the end? Like, okay, I know this. It's like, how is it going to connect? How are they going to connect it? That was my question. How are they going to connect all of this stuff that happens to the women together? They do a perfect job doing it. I mean, so if you're that person that's watching this on Movieplex or Stars or HBO, and it's like, come on, guys, get to the point. Just roll with it. And at the end, you'll take a nice big breath of relief, because it's like, okay, everything that just happened actually has a purpose and it has a meaning. And that's a great thing. So again, this movie is as great now as it was back in 1995, back then when it was released. And it's definitely a movie that deserves a second look. If you kind of walked past it the first time, check it out. And then check out the soundtrack from Columbia Records. It's a great soundtrack that has all of the music from the film. Literally, all of the music comes from the film. They're not tricking you and putting songs that just inspired the film. No, there's music from the movie. And so that's a great thing if you want to reenact it at any point. So it's Now and Then, released by New Line Cinema and Turner Home Entertainment from 1995. It's a great movie starring Rosie O'Donnell, Melanie Griffith. I'm not saying all their names. You look at them for yourself and see what a great 90s hidden gem that this is. Check it out for yourself.